All right, well, welcome everyone. I know we have people still coming in. Maybe we'll give a 1 or 2 minutes for people to join. Get started in just a little bit. Okay, everyone. I think, yeah, we still have more people coming in, which is great, but I think we can get started. So first of all, if you're here, this is for the session on humanitarian innovation, past, present, and future. So if that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. If you were looking for something else, stick around. I think this will be a really interesting and fun and interactive way to sort of reflect on the 10 years since the launch of Response Innovation Lab, but also how the overall humanitarian innovation space has evolved in that time. So maybe just a quick word on, again, why are we doing this? Why HNPW? Why this topic? So in 2016, the initial discussions around creating a global network of field-based, response ecosystem focused innovation facilities sort of germinated, and we'll be going through the story of that in this session. At the same time, 10 years ago was also the time of the World Humanitarian Summit, which also put innovation in sort of a more central place in the humanitarian discussions about humanitarian reform and the future of the sector. So 10 years is a long time. I think for as we all know, in this space where things move very quickly sometimes, but also sometimes the system as a whole tends to evolve in fits and starts. So this is I think at this HNPW, as we look to as we reflect on a system that is going through deep transformations, we thought this would be a good time to have this discussion. So to start off with, I know some of you are familiar with Response Innovation Lab. I'm going to reshare my screen in just a second because I just realized I need to enable video. So let me do that. So some of you are familiar with Response Innovation, maybe some are not. And so we thought it'd be useful to maybe kick off using a video that we've produced on the story of Response Innovation Lab. So let me make that happen.
In 2015, Nepal was hit by a devastating earthquake, triggering a massive humanitarian response. As emergency turned into recovery, one relief worker noticed that local social innovators were systematically absent from critical planning meetings. In those days, humanitarian innovation spaces were almost exclusively based in the global north, far from the response frontlines where critical problem solving was actually taking place. In Nepal, a group of changemakers decided to disrupt that model. With the support of World Vision, a team of humanitarians and talented local innovators created the Nepal Innovation Centers. Startups, tech companies, and social innovators could co-create and scale solutions to the most pressing challenges. By 2017, the success of NLab inspired a coalition of leading humanitarian actors and social innovators to launch a groundbreaking joint initiative they called Response Innovation Lab. Today, RIL has grown into the largest network of field-based, non-profit humanitarian innovation hubs, fostering local innovation and learning ecosystems, and implementing projects that solve persistent humanitarian challenges through a localized networked approach built to rapidly scale impactful solutions. RIL staff and partners continuously identify humanitarian innovation actors, making it easy for organizations to find peers and partners, convene key stakeholders to understand demand for new solutions, broker partnerships between implementers, innovators, donors, and enablers to test and scale solutions, support innovation projects through public, open source training materials, tools, and guidance, and help partners generate evidence to learn from innovation journeys. The entire humanitarian system is going through unprecedented disruption. By embracing innovation, experimenting, and investing in the potential of local ecosystems, we believe that humanitarian responses can evolve to meet the needs of tomorrow. Do you too believe that social innovation can change the world? If so, join us in writing the next chapter in our story.
Thank you. So I hope that set the scene, and we'll be talking a lot more about that story in the next few minutes. So I think just a couple of things before we really get started and get into that storytelling element. Just I think as a reminder of the things that Response Innovation have tried to accomplish, some of the things that we tried to introduce into the system at that time, and we're still doing today. So one is really focusing on ecosystem building, and I think this is something that will surface throughout these discussions: the importance of innovation not being in a silo, but being a system and a process that is inclusive. Secondly, really seeing an innovation as a public service. Again, this is a humanitarian sector. We are doing this for greater good, and innovation should be available. It should the technical capacity, the systems, the assistance should be available to people in that space to generate impact and to increase delivery. And then finally, we've also been very keen to talk about adopting solutions as opposed to seeing innovation strictly in the lens of invention, people developing their own solutions in silos, as opposed to trying to take external ideas, to collaborate with people, to adapt and adopt. So as we get now into the session, I just a couple of things to note about how we plan on running the next hour and 50 minutes. One, this is meant to be casual. This is about storytelling. If you have stories to share or anecdotes, please use the chat. That we also want to hear from you, and we'll hope to have enough time for some good Q&A. We will be making this available on YouTube, so it should be easy to access if you want to look at it again, if you want to share it with others. And then finally, there will be a follow-up. We'll do a summary, and then we'll share resources. We're also sharing resources in the chat as we go. So without further ado, let's get into it. And so you'll see this session, we structured this session into 3 elements. We'll start off looking at the past and get a sense of like what happened 10 years ago, what were we trying to do, and how did we get there. Then we'll shift to the present. What does humanitarian innovation look like now, especially from the perspective of the practitioners, the people who are implementing innovation programs, facilitating these programs, funding these programs. And then on the third part, we'll look at the future. What are some of the trends that are shifting, that are sort of shaping the way that innovation is being used, and how it might affect the system as a whole. So in the first part, I want to bring with us 2 of some of the original implementers and sort of thought leaders of Response Innovation Lab. So first, maybe just a quick introduction on my end before I turn it over. So my name is Max Vier. I'm the global director currently of Response Innovation Lab, but I was also part of the story from the beginning as a representative of Save the Children, who helped bring that organization to the partnership and sat on the executive committee and was involved in some of the thinking about the model. But I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Wild, who is, as in the colloquial terms, the OG here, the original generator, we can say, of Response Innovation Lab. Jenny, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. I don't often get called an OG, so thanks, Max. I've moved out of the humanitarian space and am broadly in the innovation space for social impact, focusing now mainly on AI.
Fantastic, and we can't wait to hear about what you were doing 10 years ago. And then Charlene, who are you? Why are you here? Oh, sorry, Charlene, we can barely hear you, so it's going to have to be a lot louder or closer to the mic or something.
Hi, everyone. I'll have to speak like that. Is that okay?
It's better, but it's still a little faint. Sorry.
Sorry, there is nothing I can change as a setting on my side, so I try to speak quite
But this is good.
loudly.
I think this is
Okay.
good.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. I started Response Innovation Lab in Uganda in 2018, where it was hosted by Save the Children and still running until today. And very happy to also have some colleagues and some innovators from this time joining today. I just want to say, now that I've graduated from REAL, let's say, I'm still working in the humanitarian innovation space, and REAL has kept a really close, is really close to my heart to this day. And just, I wanted to say also, I'm joining from Beirut today, and I'm
go ahead. Sorry.
Very privileged position to be able to talk to you, to be in a safe place to do so, while there is a terrible crisis unfolding in this region. So I hope I won't be too scattered in my thoughts today. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene, and we really appreciate you being able to join as you are, evacuated from Lebanon due to the conflict in the region. I'm going to stop this. We can sort of see each other. Maybe I think that'll be a bit better. So I want to get started and ask you, Jenny. So can you take us back? It's 2015, 2016. There's a terrible earthquake that shook Nepal. You're there for the response. So what were you doing there? And then what made you think that working inside the response, something new had to happen?
Yeah, I was leading the response for World Vision, as I call it, or called it back then, a response director. And as any good response humanitarian professional knows, there's always this weight of act now versus create a better response or create more impact. And the system and responses are really pushed to move and act now because that's how you create impact. The challenge is that you're constantly making decisions over a possible better response. And in Nepal, as many other countries, you've got incredible innovators, incredible entrepreneurs and innovations, all kinds of interesting resources. And then internationally, you have a bunch of kind of interesting resources and innovations, some of which are useful, some of which are not, as always, trying to kind of come into the response or offer themselves. And so we were trying to work out how do we create space to look at the biggest challenges we have and keep making decisions and keep on moving. And I think the insight that we had was that what was missing really was a local mechanism that would bring people together in country, whether that was humanitarians, business people, government, otherwise, and then could really think about those problems at the coalface. So you had the problems that mattered, the people who understood the context, and you could test them in response, while things were moving, and we all know contexts move. So I think that was the interesting piece. And if you think about it from a different perspective, the constraint wasn't ideas. It's not a brainstorming session. The constraint was really about building things for adoption.
Thanks, Jenny. I think we'll go back a little bit to what you put in place there to make that adoption happen. But I just want to go to you, Charlene, because at that time you were in a very different part of the world, but very much already in the humanitarian space. At that time, what place did innovation have in your work in the humanitarian space?
Thank you, Max. Yes, at the time I was working in Chad at the World Food Program. And I have to say, innovation was not like very high on the radar in Chad in general. And that was a shame. And in hindsight, I can really see how a Response Innovation Lab could have played a role in that local context, especially because the country had been facing a recurring crisis, some of which is predictable every year with the lean season, but people being so stretched in terms of what needed to be done and the resources being scarce, it was just quite hard to come up with something different. And there were some initiatives around trying new things, nonetheless. And what was clear in all of those were that it needed to be done in partnership, and the humanitarians needed that little extra boost, that little extra support to make space for it in the operation they were running to.
I think you've just you muted yourself at the very end, I think, but we got the last word, I think. um so yeah, Jenny, back to you then, because I mean I also being in that space, I think some of the early publications from Elra and others were saying that, there is innovation. There was always innovation happening in a humanitarian space, but it was done really in an unstructured way, and things didn't stick. And like you said, there wasn't further adoption. So when you decided to kind of shake things up and to try something different in Nepal, what were some of the features you wanted to build in? Like how did you think you could address some of these problems of, innovation not really necessarily happening in a structured way and not leading to results at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on some of this before, but I think one of the first one is problems first, solutions later. So if you're thinking about how do you create the biggest impact for the most vulnerable people in the world, you're thinking about what are the problems you can create impact around. And that when you move to the problems, then you get away from all the shiny object syndrome, which is hard to get away from sometimes, and the politics. And I think the second one was local by default. And it's funny because I think there's an ethical or moral question here. But for me, it's really, again, it comes back to that impact, and it comes back to the adoption. So if it's not owned locally, it's just not going to last. So I think there's multiple pieces there, but local by default was a big shift. And then innovating in emergencies as we work in emergencies. So if you've ever studied working in chaos, moving from a kind of act, sense, respond, which is very much, by the way, innovation globally now. But you take an action, you see what happens, you kind of sense, understand it, and then you change it, then you adapt. And so taking that way of responding into innovation, I think, was really helpful in moving as quickly as possible to get that impact. And I think the other piece was just really bringing people together. So, in Nepal, we had a brilliant Nepali guy who just turned up at our lab one day next to a Harvard graduate. They created something together that essentially improves building in remote areas. That's now being used by well over $1 billion worth of projects globally. And so you find these kind of magical synergies between people working together on the right kind of problem. And I think that's where we created some of the biggest impact.
No, thanks a lot. And I think that is, and I'll be curious to hear also from you, Shala, a bit later about, your experience in Uganda. But certainly, I think one of the assumptions I think a lot of people made at the time was that, there was a supply issue with innovation, that we knew there was demand from the humanitarian sector, but people just didn't think that there was like available solutions or the ability to develop those solutions locally. And I think what happened in Nepal and elsewhere really shook that. And I think that was one of my first takeaways. Would you say that that is one of the main sort of lessons learned, or what surprised you, I guess, about the work of the Nepali, like what surprised you in a pleasant way, and then maybe what issues did you see as sort of things that might end up being problematic for this kind of space to run smoothly.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I think one of the big lessons is that not just that innovation is hard, which it is, but that in emergencies specifically, delivery is hard. And so delivery becomes a design constraint. It's part of the innovation process. And so if you think about how innovation happens as a process, there's a lot of like brainstorming, hackathons, idea generation, all useful in its own for the right kind of issue. But in an emergency, for a humanitarian set of problems, innovation is a delivery system. And delivery is a design constraint. And I think that then changes the way you think about it's not a one-time hackathon. It's about adoption. It's about local ownership. It's about the actual impact that comes out of it. And I have worked, and I currently work with a lot of, San Francisco AI companies. And it's funny as those kind of understandings are starting to flow through into concepts like forward deployed engineers. Everyone has a forward deployed engineer right now. And essentially it means an engineer that also thinks about impact and works with the problem. I'm like, oh yeah, we did that 10 years ago at Real.
Well, and I think that leads me to my next question. I'm sort of going to conflate two into one here, because at this point, after the success of NLab, it was proof of concept, and I think you made the decision to try to expand that into something bigger, something that was going to be global, that could unlock more impact in different responses. Now, a couple of things. I think this is also kind of when I started to engage, and I was kind of struck, and I kind of want to get your feel for what you were seeing at the global level, because there was, through the World Humanitarian Summit, and that sort of had kickstarted a wave of interest, but you were seeing quite a lot of very centralized approaches to innovation, these sort of labs and structures in the global north. Whereas when I looked at when the people that were meeting, even though I think we weren't necessarily the most diverse group of people. We were people that had very much frontline experience delivering humanitarian responses. And so when we started coming together, and so Jenny, you had, the original vision. Were you seeing this? Was the idea to build kind of an alternative to these central, sort of centralized system, or was it something complementary? How did you see the Real initiative fit into the global sort of emerging humanitarian innovation space?
I think there's real use at all levels. So the way I see it, and by the way, Max or anyone on this call, feel free to disagree with me, is that there was the GAHI, Global Alliance for Humanitarian Innovation, the Global Humanitarian Labs that got many millions of funding at a global level. And I think where they succeeded or did well was convening and setting direction at that global level. But where global convening can set direction, I think field execution is what really creates change. And so if you follow this through line of innovation as a delivery system, if you've been a humanitarian response, in response, the most expensive thing is a bad assumption. If you're working off a bad assumption, you can not only not create impact, but you can create harm. And so I see the Real as really that ability to create the change by people who either very well understand the context. So in Nepal, that's Nepalese. They know their country, they know the way their government operates, they know what kind of systems will or will not work 15 days walk from the nearest road in a small community in the Himalayas. Or people who understand the humanitarian practice, chaos, working in chaos emergencies, which are often humanitarian professionals. And there are others who have a lot to give outside of that. But I think that change happens in country. And so I saw this kind of real useful ability at a global level to convene and set direction and think about what could work, fundraise, and then for the Real to create impact.
Thanks, Jenny. And that's a great seg to Shalen, because when it came to creating impact, you were one of the first people who were tasked to implement this model that we created. We saw it on the video, the pillars around mapping and convening and matchmaking brokering and innovation support. So like, what was it like basically to take this model and try to make it happen in a place like Uganda?
Thanks, Max. It was a beautiful challenge. I think at that time, my colleague Nishant was doing the same job in Somalia, and we got on board with the vision. And then we're like, okay, how do we do this now? And the challenge was then to have build on the successes of Nepal, and then build something that was relevant in our specific contexts. And one of the challenges we immediately had was that there was a lot of suspicion in the humanitarian space, because our systems are, the architecture itself is not really meant for support systems, support services like really was trying to offer. It's focused on implementers, people who deliver services or goods. And when we explained, we want to help you do what you do and just help you amplify the impact by trying to bring some innovations, it took really quite some time to get the message across. And in addition, you have this incredible competition for funding, which is not going anywhere. So when we try to explain that the support is for everyone, it's for public goods, it's going to be knowledge available to all. It took also time for people to see the value they could derive at individual organizations from something that was going to be public. And we really hit a turning point in Uganda when we supported the first pilot, because it made things more concrete. And my personal view is not that real is meant to be really a supporter of pilots, but it does help make things concrete. And then we had to find the early adopters, because real itself was an innovation. So we had to find those allies, the ones who saw the value of that innovation and decided to work with us. And in the case of Uganda, one of the strong early adopters was the cash working group. So within the coordination structures, some people who understood and saw really value, and also a sector that has some experience being at the crossroads of humanitarian and private sector. So that was also one probably of the reasons they got it quicker, what we wanted to do. And then what helped us become an accepted service in Uganda was that we established a clear focus on some topics, and we ensured, we communicated clearly that we were not going to compete with other thematic coordination bodies. So it's a lot of politics to even get to start to doing the work you want. But once we managed that, it was quite satisfying and successful.
Now, I really think, Charlotte, that your leadership in Uganda, it really it sort of embodied some of the discussions I remember we had with Jenny and others, which was about making sure that Response Innovation Lab was a, it wasn't a think tank, it was a do tank, right? It was about, ultimately you had to support these innovations, you had to demonstrate that there is something at the end of this process that actually improves lives. And I think there's a question in the chat, I think, that links to that, because obviously when you work in innovation, it is different than humanitarian programming, where you expect every project to come to a conclusion, to reach at least a minimum amount of objectives. But there is failure. There are things that, there are dead ends in the innovation space sometimes. And the question in the chat was, what do you do about that? How do you manage when some of the solutions you were highlighting were moving forward, but then some didn't? How did people think real was not working, or how did you manage the discussion around, like, things not always succeeding?
Yes, and I think it's a very good one, because in the humanitarian space, the stakes are high. So one of the things that real was helpful for was that we we would guide innovation projects to fail responsibly. And for instance, with the ethics checklist that was developed, which helped pilot in a way that you would not cause harm to the communities. And you have to think of embedding the innovation in the design that ensures that the improved way you want to provide support, if it doesn't work, it doesn't mean the community is left without the critical support they need. So it's like a whole system that you really have to think about all of these aspects, and also create some awareness about what learnings will come out of those failures. If it doesn't work out, how can you react and make sure some of it will become useful, even though it might not have reached exactly the objectives you intended?
No, thank you, Charlene. And I think, yeah, and to sort of close out this discussion and sort of shift towards the future. Well, I would say maybe one thing, Charlene, before we take a step back is, in a nutshell, like what would you say was like the biggest achievement in the initial phase of like launching the lab in Uganda, and what was the hardest lesson to learn?
Okay, I'll start with the lessons then. It takes time. And another of the lessons, I think, was that this kind of model is very suitable for protracted crisis responses, which unfortunately there are many around the world right now, because it's a space where actors get to form a lot of relationships. It takes a lot of trust and connections to get to the results, and the convening function of REAL can really unlock partnerships and ideas in a way that's very meaningful in those contexts. Another lesson was that the assumptions around Response Innovation Lab, in terms of needing to share what works, encouraging adoption, we were able in Uganda to apply that to innovation and more broadly to good practices and learning, and really realized how critical it was to facilitate those discussions in a neutral, impartial, and cross-sectoral space where people could learn from one another without having that fear of competition. So those were lessons. It took us a while to get there. And successes, I think we had many. And the fact that some of the colleagues are on today and the activities that are still going on is already a proof of the success. But after a while, instead of us knocking at doors, explaining what we wanted to offer, responders started to come to us. Humanitarian actors, UN, INGOs, local NGOs, and startups who wanted to work with REAL and who asked for our help, so much so that REAL couldn't meet the entire demand. And then it also translated into impact in a way that we see some of the innovations now being considered for adoption by the government, which is one of the pathways that allows durable impact. And we see also beautiful journeys of innovators, and I know Sol will talk more later, who have come such a long way since we started working with them. And we also were able to sense where are those tough conversations that the sector needs to have, and where there wasn't a ready-to-use space, like private sector engagement, localization, focusing on resilience building. And we really opened some conversations to multiple actors who were excluded from that space before to enrich the response.
Thank you, Charlene. And we have 1 minute, so I'm going to hand it back to Jenny. So what were some of the, again, you're the originator, you sort of led this whole process from these early years. Like, what did you think were the most important lessons that we learned when we started to open these, I think, an initial 5 labs, in 5 locations, and with various amounts of success and some failures along the way? What were some of the takeaways that stuck with you?
Problems first. So start with what's keeping people in country awake at night. Adoption as a unit of success. a prototype. It's not an innovation if it doesn't scale. The ecosystems piece. So the network effect is the asset. It's not the lab. Ecosystems scale better than organizations, which we see over and over again. So rather than like a UNICEF, UNHCR, WFP, World Vision, they should all have their own innovation programs, but coming together creates far more impact because innovation is a contact sport. I think trust is the infrastructure, which Charlene really pinpointed. So don't forget those local leaders and local legitimacies, or you're going to fail in country. Scaling needs pathways. It's often the boring stuff like procurement or leadership buy-in, but focus there. Because if you don't scale, it doesn't create impact and it's not worth your while. And I think probably the most valuable thing we built wasn't a product. It was this distribution mechanism to be able to build a lab and build a lab and build a lab. And I think what came out of that was the interesting piece of the kind of bottleneck of innovation, moving from invention to endurance. And maybe just to tie it off, I now work in AI with vibe coding and agents. And in a world that is now / soon, where you can build anything, the question doesn't become anything in technology. Caveat, the question doesn't become, can we build it? But it becomes, can we sustain and scale it? And can we do that without harm? And so I think that's one of the big questions for you now.
That's a perfect transition, Jenny, to the next panel, which is about the present. So you brought up some of the key, the key trends and the challenges of today. So let me shift over to the next. So I'm trying to get this to work. Here we go. To the present, and I'm going to hand it over to my dear colleague, Kalain Ankunda, who's going to take us through and moderate this session on where are we today with humanitarian innovation. So Kalain, over to you.
Thank you so much, Max. And thank you, of course, Jenny and Charlene, for that good recap about the founding of REAL and the growth. I personally have also been able to witness it over here in Uganda. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we're going to move on to another discussion, and this discussion specifically focuses on the current state, like Max said. What's the current state of the system? We would want to know how different actors see through their own role, their first-hand experiences in the sector, with the sector. And so for this specific discussion, I'm going to be joined by a team of 4 people, the ones that you see on your screen. We have Claudine, Kara, Sol, and Yaman. So to kick this off, I'm going to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves in about 1 minute or less. Tell us who you are, tell us who you work with, tell us something that worries you about the humanitarian innovation space in the current day, and maybe also something that excites you about the humanitarian innovation space currently. So we can follow that order. Claudine, you go first. Then we shall have Kara, Sol, and Yaman.
Thank you, Colleen. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, so hi, I'm Claudine Kishik. I'm a design researcher and innovation consultant. I've been working in the innovation field for the past 5 years or so with social innovations in the humanitarian space, corporates, and some academia. I did my master's a couple of years ago on localization of social innovations, looking at different scales and contexts, named Design to Innovate Change. And I had the opportunity to also talk to some of the people here and others in the field. Currently, I'm an innovation consultant with WFP Innovation Accelerator, but I'm joining today as per my capacity as a Response Innovation Lab alumni. I was the information manager 4 years ago or so. As for your question on worries, I think this might be shared by other people, which is the shrinking funding space in the humanitarian field. whether it be towards innovation or outside. But on the positive note, what excites me is the fact that there's a growing recognition. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a growing recognition that communities themselves are innovators, and we can see that with the importance that research and innovation is getting, and how is it growing and being integrated even in schools and universities. So people are seeing the value in it and the value of having an ecosystem that really grows these innovations. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claudine. Kara, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here, especially off the back of the last session. Super interesting to hear about the origins of RIL and to share the space. So just to give you a brief introduction, my name is Cara and I work for the GSMA Mobile for Development Foundation. So we are a foundation that represents the interest of mobile operators in the space. So we're kind of seated directly between the public and the private sector. And I specifically work for the Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation Programme, which is primarily funded by FCDO. And our whole mandate really is to try and accelerate digital humanitarian assistance. So we do a lot in the early warning space, specifically under the UN's Early Warnings for All initiative, because mobile is such a fundamental part of getting to people most in need in those situations. But what I specifically get to do is very exciting. I get the pleasure of working with our Innovation Fund grantees. So we've had 6 rounds of funding historically, and really we come in to help them de-risk their innovation and scale in these in their chosen areas and to try and reach the people that they are trying to reach. And my worry, at least, I get, again, it's off the back of what we've all been saying, is the shrinking humanitarian sector in terms of funding, and that in parallel with the speed of AI and the sector growth around that, and potentially the problems that come with that, and the need for a whole ecosystem to try and speed up to that, whether that's regulation or education around AI, and whether we can match the speed of that in time to not create more problems. But the exciting thing from my perspective is the other side of that coin, is that while I'm sitting here worrying about it, I'm actually working with innovators that are doing work daily towards fixing this and educating people, especially from a digital perspective. And I'm really excited to share a bit more on that later, but that's me.
Yeah. Thank you, Kara. Over to you, Sol.
Thank you, Colleen. Just to get some clarity, you can hear me very well?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
All right. Thank you. So my name is Sol Kawali, and I'm one of the co-founders for Safe Bango Technologies and Chief Operations Lead. And a little about Safe Bango Technologies. It's a Ugandan-based safety innovation working at gender-based violence prevention and emergency response. And literally what we do, we have come up with a bracelet where you don't need to use internet to report any case of violence or assault. And from where I see it as a local innovator, what excites me today is that the humanitarian innovation is finally shifting from the isolated pilots. We are seeing a lot of ecosystem thinking, and we are seeing a lot of people talking about the adaptation pathways of the local innovations. They are coming up with validation systems and very many stronger collaborations between the local and the global actors. However, what worries me most is that we are still structured around reward innovation over implementation. And because of this, communities have to suffer because the ideas already exist, but the people who can actually bring it up were to live from the pilot stage into the structure. It's the procurement, it is still hard. So I'm looking forward to even learning more on how this can be shared. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Sol. And then finally, we'll have Yaman. Please go ahead. Also, just to highlight that we're dropping links in the chat to the different organizations and initiatives.
Yeah, thank you very much, Colleen. Can you confirm that you can hear me well.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yaman. I work for World Vision, leading the Serial Response Innovation Lab, which have started, I think, 2 years ago. A very long journey, but I'm very happy to be with you today, alongside such inspiring voices as well, just reflecting on the past and the future as well. And yeah, it's very nice to have also like reflecting on this remarkable 10 years anniversary of Response Innovation Lab. Maybe, Colin, on your question about what worries me the most, in addition to what the colleagues have mentioned, it's like innovation is still widely misunderstood sometimes. Like you just see that we keep seeing actors sometimes just focusing on importing solutions that more looks impressive, very nice, and etc., and worked elsewhere without asking if they are truly fit for purpose for a specific context and etc. And here I think REL has really had an added value there. So only until we move away from this mindset, I still think that we risk repeating the same costly mistakes. Uh, on the other hand, what excites me, and I echo my colleague Sol, it's the growing recognition of that no single actor can solve challenges alone. So no working as in silos. So ecosystem collaboration is becoming a real opportunity, and only when there's a genuine recognition of each other's strengths, roles, and also this kind of activation and consensus. Only so that's where the most meaningful impact emerges. So that recognition to me is really a good opportunity, and at the same time, this is very exciting for the way forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yaman. I think that neatly leads us into our first discussion point. We saw how Charlene and Jenny and Max were talking about, the real model. You've just talked about ecosystem collaboration. The real model is known for being response level wide, ecosystem building, supports innovation as a public good or as a public service, promoting adoption as opposed to invention. And I wonder when you think back on what you've heard about the Response Innovation Lab model, do you feel like this model is still relevant? Is it something that can still achieve what needs to be achieved when it comes to innovation in the refugee response? And I'd like to ask all of us as a panelist to discuss, to share your thoughts about this. We can just follow the order on the screen. So we'll start with you, Claudine, Kara, Sol, and Yaman.
Thank you, Colleen. And I think, yes, definitely the real model is still relevant. I think it was already kind of, let's say, futuristic thinking when it started. And yes, just quoting Max in his trainings, innovation doesn't exist in vacuum. And I think also with what Jenny was talking about, that it is, if the innovation doesn't come from the community, it doesn't really follow through, let's say. And we've seen the evidence for it in different labs and different, even outside Response Innovation Lab, innovations that have been from the community and connected to the ecosystem are more likely to have better impact and and just like sustain themselves better in the future. So yeah, this is from my side, I think, not taking too much time.
Thank you.
Over to
Thank you
you,
so much,
Kara.
Claudine. Yeah, thank you. Community-led is the way to go. Maybe next is Kara, if you could just share what you feel about the real model is still relevant, if you feel it is still relevant.
Yeah, so I echo that. I do think it is still incredibly relevant. And in a great way, I feel like from my personal experience, the concept that real has created needs less convincing now. So it's really interesting to hear from Jenny and Charlene and like what you had to go through just to get the idea on the table, really. And now I feel like innovation and the concept of it doesn't need to fight its way into the room. It has a seat at the table. We understand now how important it is, and now it's about how can we do that in the best possible way. Localization, of course, is still incredibly and remains important, and echoes the same sentiment really, that I think it was Charlene said that RIL was an innovation of itself in the last session, which is just really interesting to me, because it is so baked into our daily work now. It's interesting to see the origins of where that came from. The other thing I found fascinating, and I would love to take this offline or, you know, answer in another way, is in the original pitch deck was a concern about AI. And I would love to know if the concern about what AI looked like 10 years ago is what it actually became and how we envisioned it. Because I mean, I feel like it's a sector that's growing daily. So I'd love to have that perception of what AI was back then. But that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, I think at that time we were not really calling it AI, probably something else. I think even just digital access was still something we were grappling with. But thank you so much, Kara. I'm inclined to agree, and that's not necessarily because I'm part of the Response Innovation Lab team. But like Charlene said earlier, or like Claudine had also mentioned, we've seen at the time, specifically for Uganda, where the Response Innovation Lab started, it was a futuristic concept, you know. Same for learning. We thought, you know, we had to really struggle to get the concept understood and adopted and valued. I keep hearing sit at the table, which for me just makes sense. So we're going to move on to, can you hear me? Please confirm.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to sorry, I lost the slide deck, but we can move to Sol and then to Yaman to just share a little bit more about the RIL model and its relevance at the moment.
Thank you, Colleen. On my side, yes, absolutely. Especially the idea of innovation as public service and ecosystem level coordination. From the innovator side, the biggest barrier isn't creativity, because we have a lot of innovators here in Uganda, but it's actually the fragmentation. So the response level ecosystem building is still very critical. Where I think evolution is needed is moving from convening towards the structural adoption brokerage. And in this way, we can think about who funds the first deployment, who validates, who champions integration. So the model is still very relevant, but now it must mature into an adoption infrastructure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well said, Sol. Yaman, please go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with Saul. And also, like, just reflecting on what Jenny was also saying about the localization and how RIL is very adopted and well structured towards local initiatives and local innovations. But maybe just like to target it or address it from a different point of view. Also, like RIL working as a innovation enablers, this is a role or an actor that you don't find it easily, and especially like just reflecting in the Middle East and especially in Syria, you find a lot of actors speaking about innovations, technical solutions, and all of that. But like what I think it's still relevant and highly needed as well, that's RIL is trying with the conveners, with the matchmaker opportunities, and etc. to bring them all, not only for discussing challenges, opportunities, and etc., but at the same time bringing people to consensus. This is something that I saw in Syria, because like we have discussed one time challenges on wash sector. There was around 40 actors, but at the same time, all the 40 actors, when we went out, it helps the innovator itself to start also like have some consensus and confirmations from not only donors, not only, I don't know, adopters or investors, but at the same time also like government institutions, because government are also like can be a big blocker, but at the same time could be also like an enabler. So in a nutshell, I think Response Innovation Lab, it's really valid and it's needed as well, especially in the context of the humanitarian context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yaman. I think what I'm hearing is The real model has now established itself. It now has a seat at the table. It's been appreciated. It's now time to take that forward, to take the next step when it comes to humanitarian innovation at ecosystem level or at response-wide level. Okay, so maybe just building off of what you've said, Yaman, which innovations specifically have you seen succeed in a sustainable way? I know we've been talking about localization, community-led initiatives or community-led innovation. Which innovations stand out for you? They succeeded, they have sustained over a long period of time, and what would you say actually made them work or what allowed them to be sustainable? We'll start with you, Yaman, and then we'll move to Sol, Claudine, and Kara.
Yeah, it's a hard question actually, and especially in Syria, we haven't like had the time for scaling. So we are now at the piloting phases for all the pilots or the initiative that we are trying. But I really think that's collaboration and cooperation with the different ecosystem. This is always a key of success because when we start piloting or developing or co-creating a solution, I really think that's like Saul will also like reflect more on that and just see that it starts from like an I don't know, a star, and you end up having a circle just because like you need to iterate a lot and trying to have these kind of communications and etc. So the key of success is to keep tracking of these kind of collaborations, activating the ecosystem, and at the same time always have these iterations and to ask, are we still valid? Are we still needed? Are we addressing the needs on the ground? And having this human-centered design, not only for the users, but also with the other actors, because like we all like human-centered design was, I don't know, created before this kind of discussions about innovation. But are we really doing human-centered design when it comes to actors, to institutions, and etc.? This is a big question. But I really think these are key factors for success, and I think we are good in a good term when it comes to tracking these kind of metrics.
Okay. Thank you, Yaman. Over to you, Sol. And I think, Yaman, what you're saying about are we really doing human-centered design also speaks to what Sol had mentioned earlier about structuring that adoption or maybe structuring the whole innovation move. Because when we think innovation, we think as long as it's something new, it can count as an innovation, but that's not really the case. So Sol, if you can share with us an innovation that you feel succeeded, it has been sustainable, what do you think made it succeed? Sol, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Maybe as Sol deals with the connection issues, we can move over to Kara and then Claudine. We'll come back to Sol.
Sure. Okay, so this question actually comes at a very interesting time for us as a program, because we've been looking a lot into answering this question within our portfolio and taking like a cross-level look to say what makes an innovation sustainable. And we've just released a report on it that has looked at our anticipatory action round. So these were grantees that all came to us with an innovation for anticipatory action for disaster risk reduction. And this whole report has gathered 10 lessons. So I'm not going to take us through all 10, but I have selected 2 that I thought were really, really interesting. And the first one was trust determines whether early warning systems succeed. And I just want to read this quote. Normally I wouldn't take it off the page, but I don't think I could say it better. It said, across the cohort, trust was the single most important factor determining whether a solution was adopted. Building trust took time and consistent effort, and often more than the grantees had anticipated. So really, we're singing from the same hymn sheet about localization. One of our grantees, NACSA, they are a company that are conducting household level risk assessments for flood prone areas in Nepal. They used human-centered design principles to design risk messages specifically in local languages that would reflect how a community would actually interpret when they receive a message for an early warning. So they were on the ground making sure that if you receive this message, will you understand what this means? Do you need to know where to go? Do you need to know what to do? So yeah, trust really is what we found is the ultimate key to sustainability. And the second thing, slightly different, is government engagement really gives legitimacy to and sustainability, especially coming from a digital angle. We really have to be careful when we're working with these projects that we're creating products that actually work in the ecosystem that we're going into, because you can create the best digital project known to man, and if you don't have high penetration on smartphones or feature phones, then it just doesn't make sense. So working alongside the governments really can be important from our perspective. People in need, for example, they are working in the Philippines with IoT sensors for their forecasting. So we needed to work with them, and they needed to work with the government to check if the system connects to IoT sensors and will be able to read that data. But having them involved early on meant that they were actually able to scale and sustain. So yeah, those are the 2 points. I'm hoping the report is in the chat, but I really recommend it. It's very easy and digestible read and has some really interesting insights.
Okay, thank you, Kara. I see we have Sol back. I have questions, Kara, follow-up questions for another time about working with government, especially local government. And when you think about penetration versus connectivity versus digital skills, but to be discussed at a later time. So welcome back. Please proceed.
Thank you. Just to add on the Kara and the other speakers, on my end, based on that experience, I have discovered that the innovations that sustain are actually really most flashy. These are the innovations which solve the real pain point, and they're integrated already into the existing system instead of running on the side as them. And they usually have an internal institutional champion who pushes the adoption forward. And for our own journey with Safe Bango, we have learned that technology alone doesn't scale, but rather the trust. So the trust with the communities, trust with the responders, the trust with the institutions. With this, we have discovered that sustainability is less more of a product, but more of the relationship around it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Claudine, please go ahead.
Yes, I think so. My colleagues kind of covered the most important parts, but yes, I would like also agree. And yeah, from what I've seen, innovations that sustain themselves are usually, or they share these characteristics of, like, first, they're solving an operational need, not just like an operational problem, not an abstract one. And they're like how much they are embedded within the existing system, localized, community-based, coming, from the ground up. And honestly, and how much they are also owned locally. So either by the local organizations, entrepreneurs, or communities themselves. And I felt that there's this tricky part with social innovations or humanitarian innovations is the fact that a lot of them come in when there's a time of need and are very highly dependent on donor funding and aid. And with that, sometimes when things start, cooling down or shifting, or in the case of scaling up, this becomes a problem where scaling up is mainly dependent on the donor instead of their locally, like embedding it in their systems. And yeah, I agree with Kara as well. There were a lot of innovations that basically succeeded or failed just when they started using a more local language, or they are looking more towards the local scene. And that proved to be also something that is very much needed when we talk about systems and innovations.
Thank you, Claudine. That's really interesting because as we move to the next question, which is going to focus on where have you seen a mismatch between what the community needs and what the innovation system is funding or supporting, like you've been talking about. I've seen both sides of the coin when it comes to local language. I've actually seen cases where and innovation was embraced specifically because translating to certain resources or materials, even just the name to a local language allowed for ownership. But like you're also saying, I've seen that the reverse of that, whereby language doesn't necessarily speak to adoption. So we've spoken a lot about trust. I think relationship is one of the things that's emerging really strongly. We've talked about demand and the need, what is the gap that you're trying to fill? How do you create ownership in your specific context, basing on where you're located? What have you seen? Where have you seen a mismatch between what the community needed and what was being funded when it came to innovations or innovation support? I will start with Claudine. We can go back.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. So maybe I can, because whenever I hear this question, it always reminds me of when I started actually in the innovation field as a program reviewer for a certain innovation incubator for a certain agency. And it also at that time, it was 5 years ago or so, as you said, AI was not really there. It was more towards tech and digitalization and so on. So there was a big push from funders towards the digital solutions. And at that time, I was doing my research in the north of Jordan, an area very close to Syria that was affected also by the war. However, that did not get the same funding situation. And they had this lab, lab where they were asked to do digital solutions. However, I started interviewing more the innovators there and asking them, okay, then why are you innovating like this? Most of their innovations were agricultural centered. However, they were not feeling so strong towards the digital aspect because it's really not what they need or what they wanted. And I think that was a big mismatch that was highlighted, is the fact that, yes, perhaps, especially now with the evolving AI landscape, a lot of attention is going towards that instead of actually looking at what people need and what is their current problem in the context that they are in. However, I also, like, on a positive note, I see that this kind of view is shifting, and people are getting more and more conscious towards the idea of maybe we should ask the local people and the stakeholders what do they want. And as Iman said, like with HCD, it doesn't just go when you design the innovation, it also goes towards all of your relationship and the ecosystem around you.
That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing, Claudine. I remember as the Learning Hub or part of the Response Innovation Lab here in Uganda, we once had a learning review on financial inclusion, and we held a convener where we brought together a number of actors, including digital service providers. And this was 3 or 4 years ago. And we were trying to understand are the refugees, at least the refugee response here in Uganda, are they ready for digitalization? Because at that time, all the donors and all the partners and everyone was pushing for digitalization. And I remember being so surprised because at the end of the workshop, one of the digital service providers recommended that we were not ready to go digital, So that's really, really interesting. Okay, over to you, Yaman, please. We'll have Sol after and Kara.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, yeah, I totally relate to you, but maybe just zoom out a bit, not to focus on AI itself, but on the innovation itself, because I think the mismatch about organizations, donors, and others, that they need to innovate just in the sake of innovation. This is one. And at the same time, even though we have this kind of collaboration, connections, and etc., and they started to understand innovation, what would be the mismatch is they don't have a framework or a facilitation for this, or framework for managing innovations. And this is something that I believe Saul and other private sector innovators, they are struggling all the time, because like how to manage innovative projects, unfortunately, it's been somehow foreseen by organizations and donors as another traditional project, which uses the tools that just reporting, indicators, and all of that. So we overload all the innovators or the private sector with a lot of reportings and etc. And all of the sudden they turned out to be more reliant, but at the same time they turned out we are trying to turn them or transform them to a local NGO with some profit and etc. So it's like a quite big dilemma, I would say. But the mismatch is that if an organization need to have or adopt innovation, it needs to understand innovation and at least to facilitate a framework or a structure for managing innovation and embracing as well innovation, having these discussions with private sector companies and etc. to come together and trying to that. So yeah, it's I'm sorry I'm repeating myself in having the collaboration with the ecosystem, but this is the case in innovation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well said, Aman. Over to you, Saul.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for also bringing back the idea where the recommendation was not to go digital, and that really hits hard because usually we come up with solutions which the communities want, but we don't focus on what community needs. And based on my experience, communities need reliability, continuity, and solutions that stay beyond the project cycles. But unfortunately, the funding systems often prioritize short-term pilots and rapid experimentation. In the protection and the JBV context, the safety systems actually require long-term trust building and institutional integration. However, most funding cycles end before the behavior change actually happens, or the system adoption can actually full take the route. So because of this mismatch, which is usually the time horizon, the community think in decades, but the funding often thinks in 12 months. So that is my take. Thank you so much.
I like that. I'm sure we've all heard of the graveyard of innovation pilots. So thank you, Saul, for sharing that. Over to you, Kara.
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo the same as everyone else in terms of sometimes digital can be an add-on that isn't necessarily needed in the concept of innovation. There's one story that's always stuck with me, and this was at another conference I was at. Somebody raised their hand to explain that they had applied and accepted a grant for drones and using drones in innovation. And it was a 1-year grant, and it was, like a very exciting new topic. And it took them 7 months to get a drone license. And that really stuck with me, that it's actually the responsibility, I think, of, especially when we're coming from a digital perspective in our area, to be responsible in the way we're designing these calls and these programs. And really, I think something that we've learned over the years is how we bake into our applications. We're talking about addressable market. Is there actually a use of this technology? Is there an appetite? And really, really understanding this in the beginning, because these ideas are really wonderful and cool, but really, if they're not going to be adopted, especially from a digital perspective, it's something that I think we are responsible for helping to pass out of people. And I do think, as a nod to the present of where we are, that we've got a lot better from learning from our mistakes throughout as an industry. But we've always got more to learn, but I think we've come a long way in understanding some obvious no's.
Thank you. And I think it's also really important to note the difference in the needs per context, how specific the context needs are. So as we wrap up this really interesting discussion, I feel like it was just getting juicier. I want to specifically ask Yaman, especially as part of the Response Innovation Lab, if you could very briefly tell us, how can we enhance the way that we're engaging with other ecosystem actors to bring up maybe more of these successes, to avoid the mismatches between the community needs and what's being funded, to push for some of the factors that we've been saying are driving success? If you could just very briefly share what you've seen around that, and then we'll have a closing round to wrap up this session.
Yeah, thank you very much. To be honest, I still think that Srill has been doing a great job facilitating discussions around innovation and trying also like to build the ecosystem about or around innovation. And I think maybe the next step is to maybe more deepening that by even more and being more intentional about activating ecosystems, and with that just like having more bringing more technical people on that, because like sometimes when we speak about like supporting startups, entrepreneurship, and etc., we really struggle like all these like this the we struggle for scale. Sometimes we build something that's very nice, very useful, and address the needs, but it doesn't have to scale because like it needs a lot of technicalities, it needs a lot of investments and etc. So maybe just to add or trying also like to invest more when it comes to like financial investment and also like exploring what would be alternative financing for scaling because scaling some people just say that scaling is the matrix where you just say that if your innovation is scaled, that means it succeed. But sometimes it's not the case because like it also depends on the context and all of that. Maybe a concrete example from our experience in Syria. We had this Made by Syrians initiative, which is takes to amplify innovative ideas and solutions that made by Syrians for Syrians and trying to connecting them with local was like connecting them with national, regional, and global decision makers, in addition to donors, innovation agencies, and etc., and trying to somehow do the matchmaking things like the usual response innovation lab is doing. And all of the sudden, actually, it's working very well because like now all the innovators have been very actively and already been match made, which is quite recently. Maybe what I would reflect on that, what we did in designing the Made by Syrians, it's that we used the Response Innovation Lab approach to identify really focused challenges in the humanitarian sector and then gave it to the private sector to start innovating and trying to co-create. Because sometimes calls are being very open and innovators sometimes they are somehow distracted and they don't have the context of the full context of that. So yeah, just intentionally to be more focused on bringing technical things or technical expertise into these kind of discussions and yeah, put scale from the first beginning just to see that's how things could move forward, especially for the innovators. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Yaman. I completely agree. So as we wrap this session up, I just want to ask each of our panelists if you could just very, very briefly, can you share on the areas of opportunities or functions for the humanitarian innovation ecosystem, especially for initiatives like the Response Innovation Lab, which are more ecosystem builders or seen as intermediaries? What do you see as some opportunities that we can take advantage of? And then we shall wrap up. I think we will start with Kara this time, Claudine, Yaman, and then Sol, just very briefly.
So I don't know whether you want to call it alternative or innovative or anything but financing. And I think that really is just such a need at the minute, and understanding how we can go from supplementing traditional donor finances with other instruments. And it's maybe about understanding a language that we haven't necessarily spoke or needed to speak for a long time. So as an ecosystem, I think it would be great if we headed in a direction where we were much more ready to understand available tools and have those actors ready to mobilize and help us.
Thank you so much, Kara. Claudine?
Yeah, also echoing Yaman's, like the question that was also asked for Yaman previously, that within like So if I want to highlight one opportunity for the humanitarian innovation ecosystem moving forward, I think it would be investing more in these intermediaries and ecosystem builders, which is right now we don't have an innovation gap. I don't feel that we have an innovation gap. There are a lot of innovations out there. However, we have this adoption gap, and these intermediaries, such as RIL, such as others, where the network is needed and is the most important. I feel you can fund an innovation so long, but alone they cannot scale up, and they need these networks. And with stronger networks now moving forward, I think this could be a really big opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudine. Yaman, please go ahead.
To be honest, I echo Claudine and Cara, and maybe just to add also, like I did some research about like how the private sector do innovation rather than humanitarian innovation, and what I found that might be very interesting is like they innovate with opportunity to market. So if we could also like having in mind the challenges, but at the same time to see that's what are the available resources available, infrastructure, laws as well. Because like when Kara said that they needed 7 months to get a drone license, this is something that's very blocking. So maybe also like trying to explore whether there's opportunity to market for the local context. That would be something that I think would contribute to more sustainable solutions on the long run. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Very, very key. Thank you, Yaman. And lastly, let's hear from Sol.
Thank you, Klein. I think I'll also build from Claudine's point of view, and it's all about like adoption. And if we are to solve adoption, we actually solve half of the innovation bottleneck in the humanitarian context. And my key takeaways, they're going to be three. One, if we come up a way of adoption as adoption financing, literally asking ourselves who become the first buyer for the innovation which is coming up. And this leads to the second one as validation as a service for the local innovators, especially those who struggle. They have success of 1,000, for example, users, but they want to move to 10,000. And then my last one is around the procurement reform that favors the private local solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul. Adoption, validation, procurement reform. I will rehearse those moving forward. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Claudine. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Yaman. Thank you, Sol. Unfortunately, we don't have time for a Q&A unless someone tells me otherwise. But once again, this has been around what is currently happening in the present. We've seen the past, we're now in the present, and the next session will focus on the future. So I'm going to hand over to Wei Xiong to lead us into the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. I would like to thank you, Colleen, Claudine, Kara, Sol, and Yama again for grounding us in the present of humanitarian innovation through these concrete examples, as well as very practical suggestions. Hello, everyone. I'm Zhang Weicong, the Outreach Manager at the Response Innovation Lab, here to facilitate the story sharing, as well as a fun activity for us for the last section of today's session, where we focus on the future of humanitarian innovation. If we look at the present, for sure, there are disruptions, there are uncertainties, but there are also signals. Like the panel just talked about, when we talk about sustainability, essentially we are being forward-looking, we're looking into the future. So there are trends we can already see that are emerging, trends we can capture, leverage, we can try to amplify, that are shaping the road ahead for humanitarian innovation. So we want to collectively envision a future where innovation can truly deliver on its promises in the future for the humanitarian sector. And in the meantime, as the organizer, Response Innovation Lab, we also want to see what are diverse or different pathways leading to this future, depending on where you stand. So that's why we're going to open the section with some storytelling. I would like to invite Aisha, Chris, and Takashi for a round of introductions of themselves. So over to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am Aisha, working with Rwanga Foundation as a project manager, and gladly we are also the RIL affiliate in Iraq. I've worked with RIL for almost 2 years and a half, and now almost another 2 years with Rwanga. I'm very, very happy to be back to the family that I see myself belong to. I live in Iraq, literally in Erbil. Feel free if you heard some fightings or some issues because of the political situation that currently happening. So I'm very glad again to be here, and thank you so much.
So Chris, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks a lot, and great to be a part of this session. I'm Chris Hoffman, the CEO of Humanity Link. But prior to beginning Humanity Link, which is a technology firm for designing and building technologies for nonprofits to be able to scale their activities, I was in the humanitarian sector for more than 20 years, and worked with Jenny when she was with World Vision at the Real, and so love to hear about this journey and everybody's stories. So great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Takashi?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Takeshi Kumino. I serve as a chair in Disaster Reduction Response Network, ADR, and in short, based in Japan with CWS in Japan.
Thank you. As you can see, our storytellers for this section are from very different backgrounds, representing very different perspectives. So now we're going to see from their vantage point what kind of trends or movements or directions we can see that are emerging, leading us to the future of humanitarian innovation. So we're going to start with Aisha for some story sharing.
Thank you. So first of all, like humanitarian innovation, it's not only a tool, it's more about a dignity, a shifting power, and ensuring that the crisis that affected the community, that they actually lead to some solutions. But when we come and talk about solutions, as we are a local NGO, we focus more on community-led solutions. And I'm just going to talk about the current situation that Iraq is going through due to this political situation. One of the things that happened that the electricity have been cut from the whole country, the government electricity, and this is the main electricity that the whole Iraq is depending on, rather than the private sources of electricity that we can say that I'm currently now depending on. And this is where Rwanga, we thought about, okay, why don't we, since this issue is keep continuing over and over, and that the country we are living in is not a fully sustainable or sustained country in terms of electricity. So why don't we do something that is a humanitarian innovation and it's actually serving people? At the same time, when we were thinking about doing a strategic innovation step forward, we also received a lot of complaints from communities who are living in the rural areas of Kurdistan. And they were more into, okay, we're facing electricity gap in winters, sometimes in summers, and etc. And this is where we thought of, okay, now we can have a sustained, innovative humanitarian approach to the rural villages, first as a pilot. We did a couple of assessments, and in these assessments, we find out, according to the budget that Rwanga can provide, is providing a sustainable rural villages through a solar power. And our plan is actually starting from 2026 to 10 years forward, which will be 2036, is to transfer 20 villages into a fully solar powered communities. Not only that, but also providing a capacity building for those communities to know how to deal with the solar power and also how to maintain it in the future, and how to connect our previous graduates from TIVET programs who have learned how to do maintenance to solar power and merge them with the rural communities where they can benefit together from the learning they faced. And in addition to that, this will lead to generate at least 6,000 amperes of clean energy, which is the aim to enhance the energy access that and to reduce the dependability on the future on the fossil fuels. In addition to that, after the assessment we have done, we figured out that 20 villages that we already nominated for this project, we will be having a direct beneficiaries around 20,000 individuals or families. And this is where we can see that the gaps when it's come from the community, and then when the solutions is owned by the community and they provided with the capacity to take over this solution to provide it with more scalability and sustainability in the future.
Thank you, Aisha. The next one we have Takashi.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm Takashi from ADR and CWS. I will speak a little bit from adoption perspective, because I think that's something that we've been discussing with particular emphasis on the local government. From my perspective, I think the future we want is where it's not where local government only receives these innovation and decide whether to fund them or not, but it's the one where local government actively seeks out or they legitimize and embeds community-led innovation into their own system. We've been part of this community-led innovation partnership program, CLIP in short, with the support from UK FCDO. We've been part of this for about 6 years, and we can offer some insights into this. Within this CLIP, there were 97 community-led innovations in Philippines, Indonesia, Guatemala, South Sudan, where we saw sort of a consistent pattern that local government became a partner rather than sort of a bystander or, so innovation didn't just survive this process, but they actually scaled. We had the recently external evaluation of CLIP, which also showed that 74% out of these innovations went beyond the pilot or prototype phase into growth and scale phase, which is significantly higher than the industry standard. And I think this is due to the focus on strengthening the ecosystem around each innovation or solution, including co-creation and collaboration with the local government. Just to cite a few examples, for example, in the Philippines, there was an innovation called A-Trams, which is a community designed accessible transport vehicle for people with disabilities. It was originally piloted in one municipality in Manila. There's a legal side to it. So Philippines General Appropriation Act requires all government agencies to allocate at least 1% of their budget for services for people with disabilities and older persons. And so they've used that sort of legal requirement as a lever. And the result was the A-Trams was formally integrated in the Las Piñas City Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan in 2023. And now it's being replicated in 20 local government units in Manila. And I think there are ample examples of where community-led early warning system being adopted by local governments' disaster risk management plan as well. In Indonesia also, legally, the government provides each village, say, roughly around $60,000 to $80,000 per year as autonomous village fund. CLIP innovations in Yogyakarta, in Indonesia, they use that as a sustainability pathway. For example, a food barn program was integrated into a village development plan this year, actually, in 2026. And it also unlocked the special fund of Yogyakarta, Merapi volcano evacuation related to innovation. They received approximately 100 million rupiah from village funding. So these are really not grants from NGOs, but this is public money allocated by the local government. So I think these examples also show that the government adoption is not nice to have at the end of the project, but it actually works as a multiplier. And when local government endorses an innovation, embeds these things into their disaster management plan and allocates their own budget, I think these innovation ideas outlast any donor funding cycle. And I think that's the future we want also, is that, the governments at every level, either barangay, municipality, or provincial or national, they have a clear mechanism to identify or validate and fund community-led innovations. And they're not considered themselves as sort of a beneficiary, but they become true partners in this disaster risk governance pursuit. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Takashi. Now we have seen the power of community or being aware of the context from Asia's sharing, and also how government can be a multiplier through Takashi's sharing. Now let's see what Chris brings us. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective on things. I completely agree with Aisha and Takeshi and the bottom-up grassroots community-based innovation approach and everything that the REAL really stands for on ecosystem creation and ecosystem mapping. But the one piece for me, it was actually just out 2 days ago. One of the heads of one of the UN agencies came out and said, we really need to share our data together as the UN and as organizations. And I actually took a step back from that and was like, actually, no, it's not about sharing data. It's about collecting data in the right way and giving that sovereignty back to the individuals for whom that data is generated from. So actually, I think they were just talking more about polishing the problem, as my friend Ben Holt usually says, versus actually coming up with different ways of being able to utilize data, restore dignity to the communities that we're serving, and ensure that they own that data. And how do we actually create the systems to pay them for that data or offer services around that data so that they're able to continue to grow? Because data, we know, we hear about AI and all these other things, but we know that everything is data hungry. And especially in a lot of the areas where we would respond as humanitarians in a disaster, people might not be aware of how useful and how valuable the data that they're providing on a consistent basis is, how duplicitous that data collection is. We've always talked about survey fatigue, etc. But why aren't we able to utilize current technologies and systems to be able to consolidate that data, ensure that it's sovereign, owned by the individuals, they understand that. And so if you look at my slide where I say registration is dead, I believe that registration is the wrong approach today when engaging with people in vulnerable situations that need assistance. And I said onboarding is the future. When we look at the systems, the technologies, the service provisions that are available both from a government perspective at the community level, but also from NGOs and other civil society organizations providing assistance, why isn't there a central place where we can query that information? People give their information freely with consent, and that information can be queried and services can be delivered to those people. Because that's what we expect as people in the global north, or the global minority as we would call it. That's what we expect when we give our information to an organization, that we're going to get something back from it. And so I think that we need to start looking at the data management perspective within the humanitarian sector much more deeply. I think that will expand out our opportunity for innovation and service delivery and targeting, et cetera, again, from a technology standpoint. And I truly believe that the current situation where we are today, following 2025, that we need to understand that we have a lot of data available to us. We have the opportunity to collect other data, but we are still tending to focus on the extraction versus actually the utilization of the data for the individuals in the vulnerable situations. And so I think the future of data and sovereignty is at our grasp. I think organizations need to take a much bigger step towards understanding how to utilize different systems, different backends, different integrations, different bridges to allow for this data to be shared, but done in an anonymous way, but also in an opportunity to provide services around it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So now I have a question for each of you. So earlier we actually spoke about the real model, and one of the features of the real model is response level ecosystem building. So even from your sharing, I think one common pattern, or let's say trend, is we should all collaborate as an ecosystem. So now I also wanted to, mention that we do see a lot of peer organizations shifting to an ecosystem approach. So for example, we see ecosystem thinking becoming more and more prominent. So this question for you, if the trend you presented becomes the defining force shaping the next decade of humanitarian innovation, then what kind of shifts should the real or other ecosystem actors need to make in order to stay relevant and effective in the future? So we're going to start with Asia, then Takashi, Chris. Over to you, Asia.
Yes, thank you. I think that again, in the context of Iraq, I think that the key shift for real, and not only REL, but also other ecosystem, is to act and move towards support, from supporting innovation to more support or enabling to the local led innovations. And by this, I mean investing more in local organization, in youth innovators and communities, because it's not only a matter of the design, but also of the ownership of the solution. So from our experience, when communities are involved from the very start, the solution became more sustainable and scalable. And I think that to stay relevant with the real work as well and other ecosystem, it needs to that other ecosystem and real to act more like a connectors and enablers, linking local innovators, but with a global knowledge and partnership resources. The future of humanitarian innovation in this way, I think it will be focused on unlocking innovation that already exists within the community. Thank you.
Takashi?
Yeah, I think my thinking is very similar to Aisha's, in a way that I think in the sector we've been focusing on how to create this support mechanism and incubation mechanism for these ideas that are presented by these professionals, aid organizations, research organizations, and sort of use the market methodologies to scale. Which from the community perspective, it's a very different ways of working. But we haven't focused enough, I think, on how can these communities, with their inherent strength that they already have, become the innovators themselves, become the solutions themselves, or drive the solutions themselves. I think that sort of transformation process is truly needed, and I think it's possible. And we have evidences that it's happening. But I think we need to shift our thinking that how can these people adopt my innovation kind of approach to how can these communities and local governments also think that it's our innovation or it's our solution. I think, it might be like we may be talking a similar language or similar methodology and steps. But I think there is that difference of either focusing on the product or service and working a way around these things as a starting point, or how to think how that sort of transformation process can happen where communities themselves become the solution.
Thank you, Takashi. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Aisha and Takeshi. Yeah, couldn't agree with you both more on your thoughts around this. And again, because I wanted to take it from a data perspective in this conversation, or technology perspective, just to answer your question first, Wei Song, is how does the real stay relevant? I don't know if the real will ever not be relevant. I think there's always a need for the work that real does. To create, to be a facilitator or a convener within these ecosystems, to bring these ecosystems together and help formulate them and bring it forward. I mean, I think for me, one of the glaring gaps for community access to especially technology is digital public goods and the opportunities for those things to be able to be brought forward to the communities. so that they can understand it, almost making NGOs marketing for digital public goods, so a marketing firm for digital public goods versus on the ground implementers of technologies, because the idea being that through a digital public good, a community can curate the things that it wants to do using all of these different tools. And if they are true digital public goods and offerings to the communities, that the cost to the community is very low. And so it's really flipping the script for NGOs to actually have a more technology forward thinking in some of their work, because there are a lot of tools out there that can help communities already today, that are free for them to use, that NGOs could be pushing versus continually developing the same technologies over and over and over again. I think there's an opportunity maybe for the real to also look at a separate track. And how can you share these new technologies that are out there based on what Takeshi was saying and Aisha? How can you share these new technologies with the ecosystems that are already developed and already accessible? And so that could be a new pathway for the real in the future.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think one common word, like you all mentioned, is actually community. So before we move on to the next round of questions, we're going to make a pause and have a small activity where we rely on the power of the communities here present in our session. So now we're going to have a small exercise where I invite everyone to participate. So please type in the chat, what kind of organization do you represent, or from which perspective you are speaking from. So you might be representing a local NGO or institutional donor or government. Even if you're a student, then that's the student perspective you are representing. Then what is one trend or movement you see that we can build on and strengthen to help innovation truly deliver on its promises in the future? So why we are asking this question? Because we understand the scenarios or trends we presented just now by the story sharers are not standalone. They overlap, they interact with each other, and of course, there are also other forces shaping the next decade of humanitarian innovation. So now we actually want to hear from you. So please feel free to take a few minutes, think about the answers, and type it in the chat. My colleague Raja is monitoring the chat, and she will collect those inputs. These insights will be translated into the knowledge generated from this session, and we will share the synthesis back with you through emails. So now I will leave 1 to 2 minutes. Please feel free to type in the chat using a few sentences what kind of movements or trends you see, and we should strengthen or build on so that innovations in the future can make a meaningful impact in the humanitarian sector. So we saw a keyword in the chat already, localization. Anyone else would like to share? Please feel free to type in the chat. I'm actually also curious to know like what other speakers think. So for the speakers from the past section and also the present section, if you have any thoughts on this question, please feel free to drop in the chat as well. So we have more thoughts coming in. So adoption instead of invention, public sector perspective, bottom-up approach support. Local NGO says to design innovations with scaling in mind from the very beginning. Thank you for sharing your answers. While you continue in the chat, I would like to turn back to our storytellers for the final question to wrap up this section. So now that we have surfaced the trends, let's talk about the action. So what is your call to action, but also call to inaction, and who do you want to address these questions to? So let me explain a little bit more on what I meant by call to inaction. So in our humanitarian sector, we produce a lot of reports with recommendations. Sometimes we get super excited about the certain things, the new trends, like what Claudine mentioned in the previous section. We get so excited about AI, but sometimes it's because of such excitement, we say to each other, hey, let's try out these new things. But in the meantime, we ignore what is truly needed by the community. So that's why sometimes we need to stop doing certain things in order to make a real progress. We need to learn from our failures. We need to realize sometimes we are not really moving forwards with what we are doing because our actions are based on the wrong assumptions or even resulted from the lack of true understanding of the needs, of the context, of the communities. And sometimes even worse, we might unintentionally cause harm to the communities we aim to serve. That's why I would like to invite each of you, Asia, Chris, Takashi, to share with us to reflect not only on what we should start doing or strengthening, but also what we should refrain from. It can be assumptions or mentality or practice or actions. So over to you, Asia.
Thank you so much. I totally agree with you, Wisong, regarding what you just mentioned. And also, I want to talk about this question, answering it from a bit of different perspective. As a local led organization, we face many gaps sometimes or challenges when there is a call for proposals. So you will be developing something that maybe you will be developing in 2025. Okay, and this will be the current situation at that year, the community needs, the circumstances, and then the implementation will be starting on 2026, where the whole scenario will be totally different, relating to some new situations or emergencies that can happen on that year. And then when you are trying to be flexible to do some shifting to the activities or do some minor changes, and then there where you will be finding that the donors will stop you because no, you have a specific proposals and you need to stick with that. And this is one of the main challenges that we face a lot of here, and there where you will be doing some activities that it's not that much feasible to the current context that the community is in need. And then that will later on lead you to having some data or your report quality wouldn't be as excited as you were looking for or as you were planned for. And I think that also another point that we face a lot, sometimes there are some calls into action that already everything have been mentioned and you just need to budget it and to go ahead with to submit it. But what are if these activities actually does not match with the current situation that the country or the community are trying to target? So maybe I think this is where we can look at local NGOs or organizations to be not only an implementer, but also a designer for the solutions, because they are also more in contact with the communities, and they, let's say, we will be on the field, so we know better than let's say an international donor who they might have a bit of different mindset of the current situation. So this will be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Okay, Takashi, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the clip example that I shared, it wasn't possible without the flexible multi-year funding. If everything was set, that you're supposed to do this and this is how much you can spend on this and that, then I don't think that sort of movement creation was possible. But that being said, I think there are some things that like NGOs ourselves sometimes need to change our behavior as well. You know, traditionally speaking, we've been sort of treating the community as, yes, we go to the community and ask questions. Yeah, what are your humanitarian needs? And then based on that, we make a decision of what to do. Decision lies with us, kind of thing. I think that attitude needs to change. I think it's shifting, but there are still, I think, these approaches being taken in our sector. Rather, I think we should go to the community and ask them, what's your dream? What should be done to make sure that you're not going to be affected in the same way when the same disaster happen? What needs to be done? You tell me, and we are here to support you. So that sort of like accompaniment, supporting the process, investing into the process is more needed than ever. If we are serious about creating this movement, going beyond any project or program mentality, I think that approach is necessary.
Thank you, Takashi.
Yeah, I mean, call to action. I think the call to action is something that is still not quite well defined within the sector, which is engaging with the private sector. I think that we tend to reinvent the wheel a lot as the humanitarian sector, and I tend to believe that we also aren't really good at partnerships with the private sector. I think it's an enormous gap. And my call to action is look at the markets, because markets are sustainable. And if we just go in and do something and it doesn't have market business value or business cases associated with it, they will tend to fail. And so the opportunity to integrate assistance with the market to ensure sustainability and of the systems, I think is really, really important. And I think that only goes to engaging with the private sector at the community level, but also at the international level. I'm not talking about CSR and all this. I think it's very, very important. Field Ready, has tried some of those things as well. Some other organizations have tried it, but it's really never taken off. And I think that there is a great opportunity for that. My call to inaction is I think we should try our best to forget the last 40 years in the humanitarian sector and really think about what the next 40 years need to look like. Because currently, I think the mindset is still very white, very global north, very white saviorism associated with it. And I think that it really needs to be a very colonial mindset. It needs to be gone. We need to get rid of it. And we need to start again. And we've mentioned it, right? Every speaker here has mentioned all the same things about community, etc. But we all know this. So why isn't it happening if we're all talking about it? And that's because the system in and of itself does not allow us to do that. From the donors, we can't just go to a community and say, what's your dream? Because we already would have had to write the project proposal to the donor based on what their criteria was to meet the dream. And what if the dreams don't meet? We don't get the money. So the system has failed. We know it is not a reset, it is a reckoning, and we need to deal with that and move forward for the next 40 years in a very new and different way. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you again, Aisha, Takashi, and Chris, for this powerful call to actions and call to inactions, which really covered all levels: mindset, mentality, attitude, practice, actions. Only if we have all of this can we really drive the systemic change for our sector. So thank you so much. That's it for the section on the future. So what's next? Next slide, please. So as Max mentioned earlier, the session is recorded and you can find the recording on the YouTube channel. We will also share the takeaways, other resources shared by our speakers, such as the exciting initiatives they are working on with you through email following this session. And then I would like to share a quick word on our annual event, Relax. Next slide, please. So please save the date for Relax 26. What is Relax? Relax is our signature annual gathering where we bring together our colleagues from across the globe, as well as the partners, new friends, where we really look at local humanitarian innovations, as well as ecosystem building. For example, last year, we focused on humanitarian system transformation through localization, as well as climate resilience in fragile settings. It took place in Istanbul. It gathered 130 people from 35 countries representing humanitarian sector, local NGOs, public big institutes, support entrepreneurship support organizations, impact networks, impact hubs, as well as philanthropic organizations, impact investing consulting firms, because we really try to respond to the rising demands of our sector, try to invite unconventional voices so that we can always learn from the refreshing perspectives. We really aim to create an occasion for cross-sharing and exchange. So please save the date. It's going to be the last week of September 2026. If you are interested in learning more about how last year went, you can scan the QR code or find the hyperlink in the chat box. Next slide, please. So how can you know exactly where the location is? Please follow us across different social media platforms. You can scan the QR code and follow us. If you would like to stay in touch with our speakers, with our different country labs leads and affiliate facilities, we're going to share the contact information through email after the session. Meanwhile, this year, as we started a campaign celebrating our 10th anniversary, we also invite you to stay in touch and follow the stories and join us in writing the next chapter of the story of REAL, as well as the humanitarian innovation. Thank you so much, everyone. Please stay safe and have an excellent end of the week. And lastly, I would like to thank again our excellent speakers, storytellers, Aisha, Chris, Takashi, Kulin, Claudine, Kara, Sol, Yaman, as well as our co-organizing team, Max, Raja, Ruba, and Grace. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you everyone for making this happen together. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.